All right, welcome everyone. We are live. I'm David Neff, and I'm here with Jordan from the Research It Out podcast, and we are here to talk about homeopathy. Now, before we begin, Jordan has something very important that he needs to do, so take it away, Jordan.
So my wife is sick, and so I was at the pharmacy the other day. And since I knew I had this show, I decided I'd find some homeopathic sleep aids, to kind of mellow me out for this show. And I'm not too sure about their efficacy. You can see it's Cons Forte, it's homeopathic. You can see all the active ingredients on the back, good stuff like Avena Sativa 4X. And there's 50 tablets in this bottle. And so since I don't know how strong it is exactly, I figure the only safe thing to do is just take all of them. So just to be absolutely certain that they all work. So the bottle looks very small, but it's actually a lot of pills. It's a surprising number of pills in a bottle this small. But so it's going to take me a second. But
How many pills are there?
50. Now, the suggested dose, I think, is 2. So, going a little bit more than that. A lot of pills. And all right, there we go. So I should be completely passed out in like no more than 30 minutes, I'm sure. Spoiler, yeah. I'm not going to be.
Yep. So for those of you who do not know, this exact demonstration was done by the great James Randi and many others in the past. And so we were inspired to copy that and share it with you guys. And just to do a real life demonstration on why homeopathy is complete and utter nonsense. So what is homeopathy anyway? So homeopathy is basically the idea of like curing like, and that water has memory. So we're going to take a medicine that really works and dilute it down because the water will somehow memorize this substance.
Yeah, there are 3 pillars to homeopathic medicine in giant air quotes. Like you said, like cures like. And what that means is that if you have some kind of illness or some kind of thing, the proper treatment is to give you something that in a full dose would cause the same symptoms. So if you have something like you're nauseous, you'd eat something that would make you nauseous normally, right? So like curing like. And then the water has memory thing is how they explain their dilution leads to potency. So the more dilute the medication is, the more potent it is. But only if you mix it correctly. You have to go through the process of potentization. And what that is, it's a very technical term. You put the stuff in water and shake it. That's the way that you potentize it.
Yep. I've heard of the guy who overdosed on his homeopathic medicine. He forgot to take his pills.
Yeah. And then the third pillar, just to get that one out of the way, they treat the whole person. So it's never just take this pill. It's take this pill, but also they look at your whole lifestyle and stuff like that. So it's more than just the whole system of medicine is more than just the pills. But that's, of course, what you get at like the pharmacy.
Right, sure. So homeopathy, water has memory. So does it remember the dinosaur shit from 700 million years ago? 70 million years ago, rather?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question because I suppose the counter argument would be that it wasn't properly potentized, but that's not really well quantified what that means. So they say that the effects persist through dematerialized spiritual force. Now, that's the language of the homeopaths from when this started back in the early 19th century. Modern homeopaths tend not to talk like about spiritual forces, so they still believe it. They more talk about the water having memory thing. But I mean, surely some of that waste product was like shaken up while like in a storm or something, you know? I don't know, but no matter how ridiculous it sounds, that in and of itself doesn't mean it's false. We, that we if only we had a method to test this kind of thing,
Right, sure. So let's take a look at the ingredients that you have in the Calms Forte,
Sure.
the recommended dose, and if there's any active ingredient at all, and how potentized this medicine supposedly was.
So if you look at the back, you're not gonna be able to tell,
Hold on,
read
let
it,
me,
but
oops,
you
probably
can
fine.
see you're not gonna, it's not in focus, but you can see how official looking it looks. Like it looks like any other medication you ever get. This down at the bottom that you can't read says claims based on traditional homeopathic practice, not accepted medical evidence, not FDA evaluated. So they do put that on there. But here are some of the ingredients. I'll just read them off. Avena sativa, 4x HPUS. And that's supposed to treat stress and nervousness. Now, before I ingested 50 of these pills, I wanted to know actually what was in it. So I looked all these up. That is like oatmeal. And the HPUS is the homeopathic, like US, it's like their official organization saying that this is an official ingredient. Calcarea phosphorica. I never did get a good definition of what that was. Chamomile, 4x. Ferrum phosphoricum, 3x. Humulus lupulus, like we're in Harry Potter, 4x. Kali phosphoricum, 3x. Magnesia phosphorica, 3x. Natrum phosphoricum, 3x. Passiflora, which I think is a flower, but I'm not sure, 4x. Yeah. And then the binding agents, lactose, starch. That's what's in this thing. So in terms of active ingredients, they don't have any like actual medication, but they do. If you were listening, each one said like 4x and 3x and things like that. So what that means is that's telling you the dilution. So they use two different scales. They've got X, which is the decimal dilution, and C, which is centesimal dilution. So the way it works is you have your original handful of oatmeal or whatever. You put that in some water or alcohol, and you potentize it, right? And so now you've got 1x. It's 1 part of thing to 10 parts of water. So it's like 10%. You diluted it by 10. And then you want 2x, you take that diluted stuff and do it again. So instead of 0.1, now you're at 0.01. And if you want 3x, you do it again. So now you're at 0.001, right? And it's supposed to get more potent. So if you really want to treat it, you use the centesimal system. So beyond like 3x, 4x, 5x, you go to like 5C, where you do that exact same process, except instead of doing 1 to 10, you do 1 to 100, right? Now, the problem with this is that you very quickly get to the point where there's virtually none of the original stuff left, right? So like at 4C, you're at like 10 parts per billion of whatever your original stuff was to the water, which is like pure water in terms of like a lab definition. And at 13C, like it's very unlikely that any particular drop will have any other molecule in it at all. Now, again, they say that the effect is still there because of this dematerialized spiritual force. But that would defy the way that the body works, right? Like that's where's the dematerialized spiritual force organ that is processing this, right?
Yeah, but soon Jordan has to fake falling asleep. So yeah, let's do a quick check-in. How are you feeling right now? Are you feeling any more tired than you were before?
No, I mean, I am a father of 4 children, so I'm pretty much tired all the time, but I'm no more tired than I was when I started.
Yeah. So you actually did this for your podcast yesterday.
I
You
did.
did a podcast, and so this is now the second time that
Right.
you have done this experiment. Um, how did you feel at the end of your show yesterday?
I had a little bit more energy at the end of my show, but I think it was like well within like normal fluctuations. I wasn't like super hyper or anything. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, ingesting 50 pills of homeopathic sleep medicine definitely does not work.
Well, it didn't work for me, at least. Of course, I'm only a sample size of 1, so that's not exactly a great sample size. But I did. So I mentioned this to you in the earlier show. One really interesting thing I found out while researching homeopathy and its history and where it came from was the role that it played in the discovery of, or the invention, I suppose I should say, of double-blind clinical trials, which is, of course, how they test medicine, right? That had to be invented, and it was invented in 1835 in Nuremberg. And the way that this came about, at that time, homeopathy, which was invented in 1814 by a gentleman named Hahnemann, it exploded in popularity. And in Bavaria, it was starting to annoy actual physicians. So one of them, Friedrich Wilhelm von Hoven, published a paper basically ripping homeopathy apart, like talking about how terrible it was not scientific, etc. And that provoked Johann Jacob Reuter, who was a homeopathic physician in Nuremberg. He challenged Friedrich to try a C30 dilution of salt, which means diluted 1 to 130 times, and to see its effects. And so just to prove a point, like out of spite, von Hoven and other physicians in Nuremberg made up a procedure, a test procedure, to show this that it was wrong. So here's what they did. They announced ahead of time what this whole procedure would be. Then they got like 100 vials or so, however many they needed for the trial. And they numbered them and split them up randomly between 2 lots. One lot was filled with distilled snow water. The other was prepared according to the instructions of the homeopath. They took a single grain of salt and added it to 100 drops of snow water, and then did that again, another 100 drops, 30 times. So you had the proper dilution. The 2 pharmacists who did all the mixing, they took 2 days to clean all of their stuff, to clean themselves. They used brand new scales that had never before been touched by any medical substance. So like they went all out. And then on the day of the trial, they went to a pub where all good science is done. And they gave the vials to a commission that didn't know which vials were which. And that commission handed them to participants. And then they got the results. The results were of people who experienced something unusual. 5 who had gotten the treatment had experienced something unusual, compared to 3 with just the placebo water. And so, I mean, if you think about it, like, this is the first time random double-blind trials weren't a thing. But look at how they designed this. They had a protocol that was designed and announced in advance. There was a control group that received a placebo. The assignment to groups was random. The test was double-blind. The people giving the medicine and the people who were receiving it, neither one knew whether they got the real thing. And then they reported their findings, including irregularities. Like, they nailed it. Like, that's a modern study design right there, you know?
Right. Yeah.
So you can thank homeopathy for modern medicine, is what I'm saying.
Creo says they think that water has some structure and transmits it to another water in the homeopathy stuff.
I mean, it does have a structure, but not a dematerialized spiritual structure. Yeah. So though the history is interesting, it doesn't stand up. And it is like, if you put yourself back 200 years ago, pretend you're Samuel Hahnemann, the guy who invented it. The way that he struck on this idea was he was a doctor, wasn't doing very well, but he was getting symptoms of like malaria, and so he chewed this bark, which is cinchona, cinchona bark. And that bark happens to contain quinine, which is in fact used to treat malaria. He didn't know this, of course, but it is actually there, and it made him feel better. And so he thought, well, the bark makes me feel nauseous and the malaria makes me feel nauseous. Maybe that's why. Maybe there's the correlation, right? Which today seems ridiculous, but at the time, 200 years ago, I mean, I can see why you might come to that conclusion. The problem is he then made a huge lump to dematerialize spirit energy, and then proceeded to ignore all evidence to the contrary and plowed ahead. Right. The beginning foundation is not completely implausible for the time, but unfortunately, it then persisted for another 200 years. Right.
So, in about 15 minutes now, how are you feeling?
I feel great. I don't feel any more tired. I do feel a little tickle in my throat from having eaten 50 pills, but that's about it.
Yep. True at hell Right. How many times does the remedy have to be sued, excuse me, to make it work, and who found that out?
That's a great question. Hahnemann originally like recommended solutions in the 30 to 60 C range. So 30 to 60 times centesimally diluted. Of course, now, I mean, the stuff I took was like 4x. It ranges. But the answer is none. Like, it doesn't matter. None of them do anything. It was hilarious, actually. I was looking up the ingredients for this before my podcast, and I saw that this was sold on Amazon. And so I looked at some of the reviews, and people were like, well, how long does it take to take effect? How many do you take? And it was just page after page of people like, this stuff works great. I take it all the time. I take 1 or 2 with an Ambien, and I go right out. I'm like, well, no shit. Like, like if you combine it with real medicine, then yes, it works.
Right, exactly. So, yeah, it is definitely quite interesting that there's, at best, a placebo effect and nothing more.
Right. And that's what you find in the research. 2 papers that I thought were particularly interesting, and this has been tested literally thousands of times. But one of the more interesting ones was published in the Journal of Alternative and Complementary Medicine, which is about as friendly a source as you could possibly get, and still even like pretend that you're doing any kind of peer-reviewed science. And so they did a study in 2006, double-blind clinical study. So following that good tradition, homeopathic combination remedy in the treatment of acute childhood diarrhea in Honduras. And so they treated about 300 kids that had diarrhea, and they used a placebo and homeopathic treatments. And what they found, they were the same. They were identical. They had virtually no difference in effect. And this is in a journal specifically for like finding alternative medicine, and even they didn't publish anything, or they didn't publish favorable results. So if you can't even get them to do it, then like you have no hope.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then if you go to like a real journal, like forget it. The NHMRC, which is the National Health and Medical Research Council, they're like funded by the Australian government. They did meta-analysis in 2015, which is the biggest study I've ever even heard of. I was reading it. The data covered from 1997 to 2013, and it said 176 reviews, and I was like, okay, that's good size. And then I was seeing like people reporting on it, and that this number 1,800 kept coming up, and so I looked closer, and I realized that wasn't 176 like papers. That was 176 meta-analyses. This is like a meta-analysis. They did an analysis of 176 meta-analyses. So the whole thing, if you put it all together, was like 1,800 studies overall that they covered.
So
huge sample size. And like any meta-analysis, they, did filters to make sure they had high quality papers. They had, large sample sizes. They were double blind, well designed, etc. And the conclusion was this is a quote: based on all the evidence considered, there were no health conditions for which there was reliable evidence that homeopathy was effective. No good quality, well-designed studies with enough participants for a meaningful result reported either that homeopathy caused greater health improvements than placebo or caused health improvements equal to those of another treatment. That's as explicit as it could get. Like,
right.
Completely unambiguous.
Yep. And that's a sample size you can only dream about.
Right. And then after they did this, so their study came in several phases. So they did that initial study, right? But they didn't want to have any kind of accusation that they were, being biased or anything. So then they put out a call to homeopathy interest groups and said, here's all of our research that we did. Now, give us your best sources that we missed. Give us whatever data you think we should be looking at. And they got another about 50, it was 42 papers from them. And it didn't change anything at all. Exactly the same conclusion. So like even with like a sample size to end all sample sizes, there's nothing. It's just placebo.
Right. Creo, And it's also false that a chemical gives its properties to water, so water saves it somehow in the liquid structure. I thought homeopathy is about it.
Yeah, they don't have any kind of physical mechanism for how it's going to work, because for them it's not physical, right? It's not that the molecules themselves, there's not like any kind of physical thing. It's a spiritual force. It's just woo-woo magic,
Yeah, right,
basically. There's no physical principle on which this is based.
right. So it's literally all make-believe.
Right. And so the objections you get are things like, well, you're looking at it in a clinical setting, but that's not right, because we treat the whole person, and so every treatment is tailored to the person. And all that's telling me is, what you're saying is, you're tailoring your treatment to be unfalsifiable. That doesn't mean it works. It just means you're making it
Right,
unfalsifiable. Also, that is not a good way to get results. So if you go to do a homeopathic like consultation, you go sit down with the person for several hours, and they're going to look at like your whole life. They're going to look at like your activity, your diet, and everything. And in addition to getting this pill, they'll say, oh, you're having trouble with sleep. Well, take this pill. Also, sleep more, get more exercise, all this other stuff. Like, well, yeah, but all that other stuff like that is going to help, So but it's pure placebo. It's pure confirmation bias. The person is feeling sick. They take whatever the homeopathic flu medicine is, and then they get better, because most people get better from the flu. And then, no, another homeopathy success story.
yep. And True Tell writes, the remedies won't work unless they are subsued during preparation on a leather-bound Bible for the best effects. The leather in the Bible, what leather should it be?
I,
Here, how is the correlation between homeopathy and evangelical Christian? Does something in their belief make them think homeopathy is true?
I'm not sure what the overlap is between those two segments of the population. I can say the homeopathy is a huge, huge industry. It's like a $16 billion industry in America alone. So obviously some of those people are going to be Christian because it's America.
Right.
I have no idea what the overlap is between the two, honestly. I mean, I guess if you're getting official recommendations to do your magic shaking on a Bible, then that probably tells you something,
Yep. Puck, one pill makes you taller, one makes you small. The one your mother gives you do nothing at all.
I mean, well, spoiler, all of them did nothing at all. And
Yeah.
because there's nothing in it. It's
well,
just,
and certainly well below Avogadro's number.
well, when you get into like the 12, 30, 60C, like this stuff, which was 4X, I mean, there's still some of the original material in that, for the 50 pills that I took just now, that would be I think it was 0.005, the original concentration. So, I mean, that's not nothing. There's probably some of that oatmeal floating around in there, but, not a lot,
Yep. Yep. Though,
Yeah.
of course, if you want oatmeal, you're better off just going into the kitchen and making some yourself.
I mean, yeah, but then it doesn't have that dematerialized spiritual energy,
Yep.
But, I mean, but for me, like, okay, if all it is I go into the pharmacy, and this is sold next to actual medications. I actually had a hard time finding this, not because it was like hidden away, but because it was like right in the middle of all of the other like actual medicine was this stuff, which irritated me a little bit. But yeah,
Right. So they kind of so it's kind of masqueraded as real medicine by putting it in the aisle with real medicine instead of segregating it off into homeopathic medicine versus real medicine.
yeah, exactly. Like if they must sell it, and I don't think that places like CVS or Walgreens should sell it, because it
No.
gives it an air of legitimacy that it definitely does not deserve. But whatever, their business, fine. If they're going to sell it, they need, in order to retain any kind of vestige of ethics, they need to segregate it in its own place with like massive warning signs. That's the only way. But if I didn't know any better, I only knew this was homeopathy because I'd came there specifically looking for this knowing it was homeopathy. If I didn't know what I was looking at, I could have just like, oh, sleep aid, this one looks cool. And if I didn't read it very carefully, I could have easily taken it. And if all it is I'm having trouble sleeping, so I take this homeopathic thing and it doesn't matter, then that who cares, right? It's
Right.
yeah, I wasted my money. I gave it to some charlatans, but at the end of the day, like nothing bad happened. But that's just if I'm trying to treat my sleeplessness. What about, I read a news article recently. My mom sent me this when she knew I was doing this podcast on parents who were being charged with negligence because their child had an ear infection and they treated it with homeopathy and their child died because they weren't giving her medicine. They were giving her sugar pills, basically.
Right. And so there is really harm. So now we're getting to the actual topic, like what is the harm? And the harm is people could die by putting their faith and trust in some woo-woo magic instead of actual real medical science.
Absolutely. Like another paper, Efficacy of Homeopathic Therapy in Cancer Treatment. This is published in 2006 by Malazzo et al. And what they were analyzing was the efficacy of homeopathy in treating cancer. And the very fact that they were analyzing this tells me that people were trying to treat cancer with homeopathy. And that's not going to work because, again, it is a sugar pill. It's a placebo. You don't treat cancer with a placebo, like not if you want to get better. So the danger is not the homeopathy by itself, because that is not going to hurt you because, again, there's nothing in it. So it's not going to hurt you. But if you forego an actual real medicine because you think you're treating it with this, bullshit, then people could really get hurt and die. I mean, and then there's the more like broader problem. Having lack of skepticism in society is also dangerous. Wasting $16 billion on bullshit is also bad. But I mean, direct cause, people are dying because they think this is medicine. It's the same sort of thing as intercessory prayer. People wanting to pray instead of going to the doctor. If you want to pray because your loved one is having surgery, then knock yourself out. That's great. But like, go to the doctor though. Like,
right.
Right.
If your loved one needs to have surgery, don't pray over them instead of taking them to the doctor.
Yeah. Take them to the doctor, then pray over them. But like,
yeah,
after the doctor part.
yeah, definitely. I have to say, as I usually do, out of all the things that does not help, cognac is better.
Cognac, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, at least then you're wasted, like you're not gonna get better, but at least you feel better. Well, until the next guy, I suppose.
Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, to answer the question in the title, it definitely does do harm. And in the very same way that every other kind of alternative nonsense medicine, Reiki is another one, that in the same way that those harm. I would say that of all of them, homeopathy is probably not the worst, but it's not the best. I'd say Reiki is better in the sense only because people who practice Reiki are a little bit better about communicating. You still need to go to the doctor, though. That's like, it's still nonsense. It's still not doing anything. People still die because of it. But they are a little bit better about doing it in the context of like actual health treatment, So it's like, hey, we're going to like hold our hands over your body so you'll feel better. Anyway, go to your chemo now, But it's right. It's all opportunity cost.
Yep. It's basically mooching off of people who are desperate for answers.
Yeah. And while I'm sure that most people who practice it are well-meaning but ignorant, or I mean, the people who make this know that this doesn't do anything, right? Like they're not unaware of the studies. They know what they are. So the people who are responsible for this are the ones that are really to blame. Your Karen or your mom's aunt or whatever on Facebook sharing homeopathic remedies, like they're just ignorant. They don't know any better. But the people who produce this do know better. They know they're hurting people and they're doing it anyway. And that's unacceptable.
Right. And so with that, do you think there are any other topics that you want to cover?
That pretty much covers it. I mean, there's not a lot to say about it just because the evidence is so ridiculously overwhelming. It's been tested thousands of times and never once been found to be any better than a placebo. There's just no question anymore. I don't understand why it's. Well, I do know why it's growing, but it wouldn't be growing if people were better at reading peer-reviewed papers.
Right. So let's do a recap. Homeopathy is basically the idea of leg curing leg, and homeopathy is basically taking a real substance that works and diluting it down dozens upon dozens and dozens of times to the point where it's nothing left, and there's pretty much no evidence to support it.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't necessarily be something that actually works. Remember, like cures like means it's a substance that causes the symptoms that you're trying to cure. So they'll point to things like vaccines, like cowpox. You use that to prevent smallpox. It's kind of the similar idea, except not at all the same. So it wouldn't be like, oh, you have the flu. Here's some flu medicine, but we're going to dilute it down 100 times. That would still be nonsense. But it's not even that. It's, oh, you feel bad, you feel nauseous. Well, if you ate this, it would make you feel even more sick. But don't worry, we're going to dilute it until there's nothing left, and then you're going to drink that. Like that's homeopathy.
Yep. So basically, if I'm tired, take a bunch of caffeine, or if I can't sleep, then I can take a bunch of caffeine and dilute the caffeine down and drink the
exactly
thing because the caffeine causes tiredness.
Precisely. If you can't sleep, what you should do is take some caffeine. So, like, take some coffee, right, and then dilute it. Get 1 to 100, dilute it, and then do that again 30 more times, and then drink that last thing. And that, according to them, will treat your fatigue.
Yep. Well, with that, I think we covered pretty much most of everything. Jordan, is there anything upcoming on your podcast that you want people to know about?
Well, like I said, we just did our episode on homeopathy where we go a little bit deeper into the history and stuff. So if you found this interesting, you can check that out. I actually don't know what our next topic is, but it will be religious because we do one non-religious episode for skeptics who aren't interested in the God stuff, and then we do one religious episode. So the last one, we took some arguments against God, like the problem of suffering and divine hiddenness, to argue that certain kinds of gods don't exist. But yeah, we publish on the 1st and 15th of each month, so you can find us wherever good podcasts are sold, and we have a YouTube channel too.
Yep. Thanks for the fun and sleep well, Jordan. I'm sure you'll be sleeping well tonight. 15 days of homeopathy. That being said, let's do a final check-in. How's your overall energy level?
Well, like last night, I feel very slightly more energetic now than when I started. I think it's probably from the interaction and, being active. Yeah. I expect my prediction is I will go to sleep at about 2 a.m., which is when I normally go to sleep. So,
yep. Lucky. But yeah. With that, there's a couple of things coming up tomorrow on my channel. At 3 o'clock tomorrow, I will be interviewing a former employee of Answers in Genesis. You definitely don't want to miss that. And at 9:15 p.m., I am having a person named Kiara Mooney on my channel. She is representing the organization Teens for Vaccines. We will be discussing why vaccinations are important for young people, dispelling some myths, and how to reach anti-vax parents. So with that, if you like what I'm doing, hit the subscribe button and the bell notification down below, and don't forget to hit that like button. And you can support me by going to my brand new Patreon, patreon.com/David Neff, and the link to that is in the description down below, as well as Venmo and PayPal. So with that, thank you all so much for joining me, and have a wonderful evening. We are out.